and welcome to the Luke Lunchtime Takeaway. My name's Jim Sayers, and week by week we're going through Luke's Gospel. Every Thursday lunchtime we have a video. We took a break for the summer, but we're back for the autumn, and we're going through Luke's Gospel, looking at the words and claims of Jesus. Luke tells us that he gives us in his gospel a narrative of all the things that happened in the life of Jesus. He has checked out the eyewitnesses who actually saw these miracles to make sure that it's an orderly account and it's completely reliable. It gives us certainty about the things that we need to believe about Jesus. Now, in the early chapters, he's just been introducing us to Jesus, to some of the miracles that he did, some of the great things that introduce us to his character. But then in chapter 9 and verse 51, which is, we left off just before that last time, there's a whole change of direction. And Jesus knows that he will one day return to heaven from which he has come. But the way to that is via his cross. He must die the death of a redeemer, and therefore he's heading to Jerusalem. And in chapter 9 and verse 51, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And that shapes everything that follows in the rest of the story. Now, to reach Jerusalem, he's up in Galilee, and he has to come down through the region of Samaria to Jerusalem in Judea in the south. And there was a long-term animosity between the Samaritans and the Jews in Judea. The Samaritans were very sectarian towards Jewish people. And so while sometimes they received Jesus very well, for example, in John chapter 4, where Jesus goes into Samaria and he meets a woman at a well and he's welcomed back to her home and her family, and he stays there for a couple of days. That was unusual. Normally, if you pass through Samaria and you asked to stay in a village one particular evening, they would not be very welcoming, because they disliked anyone who was going on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And so they go in this village and they get refused. Jesus and his disciples cannot find anywhere to stay. And the disciples get really irate about this. Lord, they said, shall we call down fire from heaven in judgment on these people because they've rejected you? And Jesus says, no, leave them alone, move on, we'll find somewhere else to stay. Jesus has come to die as our Redeemer, not just for Jewish people, but for Samaritans as well. And in fact, in Luke chapter 10, the next chapter we'll look at, he is going to tell the parable of the Good Samaritan that will shake all their preconceptions. He is going to break down all the national divisions and the old sectarianisms that divide people and cause hatred. But his focus is on where he's going. He is going to his cross to die for others. And his self-sacrifice then becomes a model for us as we follow Jesus. So the big question for us today as we start back into Luke's Gospel is this: what does it mean for us to follow Jesus? What does it mean for us to follow Jesus? Jesus has a very honest conversation with the people that he's traveling with. Maybe it was his 12 disciples, maybe it was more. And different people come along and talk to him. And he says to them, please don't imagine that following me is going to be easy. It's going to be a bed of roses. Look at where I'm going. Think about my death and how that should shape everything that you think. And one of the young people in the party comes along and says to him these rather startling words: I will follow you wherever you go. Tell me where we're going, Jesus, and I will follow you, no problem. It's all that sort of extreme zeal of a young person who's never had their zeal tested by experience. And Jesus says, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. After all, he's just gone through a village in Samaria where nobody will actually put him up for the night. So something is clearly costing Jesus to make this journey to Jerusalem. Our generation is so focused on everything we have, isn't it? We've got to have the right clothes, we've got to have the right car, we've got to have the right career, we've got to live in a wonderful house, it's got to have the most amazing broadband so that we can surf all the entertainment channels that we want, and we've got to be entertained wall to wall in every moment of spare time that we have. And the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head. Jesus had nowhere to call home, nowhere that he could go to and rest and say, this is where I belong. He was on a journey. And he may ask you or me to make a similar sacrifice if we're going to follow him, to give up part of our career, to give up our career expectations, to live in a home in a less desirable part of the country, to reach people with the good news of the gospel. He may require much more of us in suffering than we ever realized when we set out. Now, lots of people say, oh, I could follow Jesus, but... and they set some preconditions. And there are some of those people here in this story, and they make excuses. Listen to some of their excuses. To another he said, follow me, but he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. My father's old, he's maybe only got a year or so, his health is failing. Let me stay at home and care for him, and when he dies, I'll bury him, and then I'll come and follow you. And Jesus says these rather startling words. Leave the dead to bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. In other words, are you going to follow me and proclaim the message, the good news of my kingdom? People need to hear it. Or are you just going to make excuses and procrastinate? And loads of people do, don't they? I will follow you, Jesus, when I found someone and we've got married. I will follow you and be a good Christian when our children have grown up. I will follow you when I've paid off the mortgage. I will follow you when pressure at work has started to ease. Do you know, it never does it? And all of those excuses are just something to put in the way of having to follow Jesus and live as he lived. And somebody else says, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those at my home. Do you know, family can be one of the biggest barriers to following Jesus. Family expect so much of us. They want us to live up to their expectations. They don't want to disagree with us about religion. Keep religion and politics out of the family. Family can be one of the biggest barriers to following Jesus and being a disciple of Jesus. But think about Jesus. Jesus receives this commission from his Father to leave aside the glory of heaven and to come and live as a servant and to go all the way to the cross for us and to die in our place. He uses this language in the final verse of chapter 9. No one who puts his hand to the plough and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Jesus put his hand to the plough. Imagine an old plough with horses and you've got to hold the plough and to direct it through the soil. He puts his hand to the task and he doesn't look back. He keeps his eye on where he's going. He is going to his cross. And nothing is going to distract him from that. He would not look back. He would not waver. And when he calls us to follow him, we have to do the same. We have to let our lives be shaped by his model of servanthood and self-sacrifice. Well, do join me next week where we'll get into Luke chapter 10 and see what his disciples do as they go out to reach the world. And we'll work out what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next week.